The Hidden Diary, Sister Catherine's Disappearance. The morning of March 15th, 2024, dawned crisp and clear over the rolling hills of Millbrook, Vermont, where St. Teresa's convent had stood as a beacon of faith for over 150 years. Sister Margaret O'Brien, now 73 and the eldest member of the small community, carefully made her way down the narrow stone steps to the convent storage cellar, her weathered hands gripping the wooden railing for support. The cellar had always been her responsibility, a duty she'd maintained for nearly 4 decades, since joining the Sisters of Divine Mercy in 1984. Today's task was simple enough. Retrieve a box of emergency candles for the evening vigil service. The ancient electrical system in the convent had been acting up again, and Mother Superior Agnes had insisted they be prepared for another power outage. The musty scent of aged stone and old wood filled Margaret's nostrils as she navigated between towering shelves lined with decades of accumulated supplies. Boxes of hymnals from the 1960s sat alongside Christmas decorations that hadn't seen daylight. In years, everything in the cellar told a story of the convent's rich history, but today, one particular story was about to emerge from its 52-year silence. Margaret located the box marked Emergency Candles, 1972, on a high shelf near the back wall. The cardboard had yellowed with age, and the masking tape that sealed it had become brittle and was peeling at the edges. As she carefully lifted the box, it felt heavier than expected, and she heard something shifting inside that didn't sound like candles. "Strange," she murmured to herself, a habit she'd developed after years of working alone in the quiet spaces of the convent. Her voice echoed softly in the confined space, mixing with the distant sound of morning prayers drifting down from the chapel above. Carrying the box upstairs to the kitchen, Margaret set it on the large wooden table where generations of sisters had prepared meals and shared fellowship. The kitchen was her favorite room in the convent, warm and inviting, with copper pots hanging from wooden beams and windows that looked out onto the vegetable garden the sisters tended with loving care. When Margaret opened the box, her breath caught in her throat. Nestled beneath a layer of white votive candles was a small, leather-bound book that she recognized immediately, though she hadn't seen it in over 50 years. The diary of Sister Catherine Marie Dupont, who had disappeared without a trace on October 31st, 1972. Margaret's hands trembled as she lifted the diary from its hiding place. The leather cover was worn smooth, and the pages had yellowed with age, but the book was otherwise in remarkable condition. On the front cover, in faded gold lettering, were the words "Personal Reflections," and below that, in Catherine's distinctive handwriting, "Property of Sister Catherine Marie Dupont, 1971-1972. The memories flooded back with startling clarity. Margaret had been a novice then, just 21 years old and full of youthful enthusiasm for her calling. Sister Catherine had been her mentor, a brilliant and compassionate woman of 35 who had taken the awkward young novice under her wing. Catherine had possessed a gift for seeing God's hand in even the smallest details of daily life, and her faith had been both deep and joyful. But there had been something troubling Catherine in those final weeks before her disappearance. Margaret remembered the late-night conversations that had stopped abruptly, the worried glances Catherine would cast toward the forest that surrounded the convent, and the way she had seemed to be listening for something that never came. On Halloween night, 1972, Sister Catherine had simply vanished. Her cell was found empty the next morning, her bed unslept in, her habit hanging neatly in the wardrobe. The only things missing were the clothes she'd been wearing and this diary, which the police had searched for extensively but never found. Margaret opened the diary to the first page, where Catherine had written an inscription: "To my beloved sisters in Christ, past, present, and future. May these words serve as testimony to God's faithfulness, even in the darkest valleys. If you are reading this, then the Lord has seen fit to reveal what was hidden. Trust in his perfect timing. The inscription was dated October 30th, 1972, the day before Catherine disappeared. With shaking hands, Margaret turned to the final entry in the diary. The date at the top of the page read October 31st, 1972, and Catherine's usually neat handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. The truth can no longer be hidden. I have prayed and fasted for guidance, and the Lord has made his will clear. Tonight, I must confront the evil that has taken root in our sacred community. Brother Thomas knows I have discovered his secret, and I fear what he might do to protect himself. But I cannot remain silent when innocent lives are at stake. I have hidden evidence of his crimes in the place where it will be safe until God chooses to reveal it. If something happens to me, please know that I go willingly into whatever the Lord has planned. My trust is in him alone. The children deserve justice. God sees everything, and his justice will not be delayed forever. Pray for me, dear sisters. Pray for the children. And pray that God's light will shine into every dark corner, no matter how long it takes. Margaret's heart pounded as she read these final words. Brother Thomas had been the convent's groundskeeper and maintenance man in 1972, a quiet man in his 40s who had lived in a small cottage on the convent property. He had disappeared the same night as Catherine, and the police had always assumed they had run away together, despite the protests of everyone who knew them. But this diary entry painted a very different picture. Catherine hadn't run away with Brother Thomas. She had discovered something terrible about him, something involving children. The local police investigation in 1972 had been cursory at best, hampered by the small-town mentality that such things simply didn't happen in places like Millbrook. Margaret closed the diary and pressed it against her chest, feeling the weight of 52 years of unanswered questions. Sister Catherine had been like an older sister to her, a mentor and friend whose disappearance had left a hole in Margaret's heart that had never fully healed. Now, holding Catherine's final words, Margaret felt a mixture of grief and anger that surprised her with its intensity. "Catherine," she whispered, "what did you discover? What happened to you?" The sound of footsteps on the kitchen's tile floor interrupted her thoughts. Mother Superior Agnes entered the kitchen, her expression concerned as she noticed Margaret's pale complexion and the way she clutched the diary. "Sister Margaret, are you feeling well? You look as though you've seen a ghost." Margaret looked up at the younger woman who had led their community for the past 10 years. Mother Agnes was only 55, which meant she had never known Sister Catherine. She had heard the stories, of course, but the mystery had always seemed like ancient history to her. "Mother Agnes," Margaret said quietly, "I think perhaps I have seen a ghost, or at least heard from one." She held up the diary, explaining where she had found it and what she had read. Mother Agnes listened in stunned silence, occasionally reaching out to touch the diary as if to confirm it was real. "We must contact the police immediately," Mother Agnes said, when Margaret finished her explanation. "This could be evidence in a cold case. After all these years, Sister Catherine might finally get the justice she deserves." Margaret nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to the implications of Catherine's final entry. If Catherine had hidden evidence of Brother Thomas's crimes, where was it? And what exactly had happened to the children Catherine had mentioned? In 1972, Millbrook had been an even smaller community than it was now. Any crimes involving children would have been major news, yet Margaret couldn't recall anything of the sort. "Mother Agnes," Margaret said slowly, "I think we need to search the convent thoroughly before we contact the authorities. Catherine wrote that she had hidden evidence somewhere safe. If it's still here after all these years, we should find it ourselves first." The Mother Superior considered this carefully. "You're right. We owe it to Sister Catherine to understand the full truth before we involve outsiders. But Margaret, if Catherine was right about Brother Thomas being dangerous, and if he really and did harm her? She didn't finish the sentence, but they both understood the implication. They might be about to uncover evidence of murder. As if drawn by some invisible force, both women turned to look out the kitchen window toward the forest that surrounded the convent. Somewhere in those woods, the truth about Sister Catherine's fate had been waiting for 52 years. And now, God willing, it was finally time for that truth to come to light. Margaret opened the diary again and began reading from the beginning, searching for clues about where Catherine might have hidden the evidence she mentioned. As she read, the voice of her beloved mentor seemed to speak to her across the decades, calling out for justice from beyond the grave. The morning sun climbed higher in the Vermont sky, casting long shadows across the convent grounds. In the kitchen, two nuns began a quest that would shake their quiet community to its foundations and reveal secrets that some people had spent half a century trying to keep buried. Sister Catherine's diary held the key to mysteries that had haunted Millbrook for over 5 decades. But as Margaret and Mother Agnes were about to discover, some secrets fight back when someone tries to drag them into the light. Mother Superior Agnes contacted Detective Lieutenant Sarah Martinez of the Vermont State Police within the hour. Lieutenant Martinez had built her career on cold cases, drawn to the challenge of solving mysteries that others had given up on. When she arrived at St. Teresa's Convent that afternoon, she carried with her not only modern investigative techniques, but also a deep respect for the spiritual community that had preserved this piece of evidence for over half a century. "Sisters," Lieutenant Martinez said as she settled into the convent's small conference room, "I want you to know that this diary could be crucial evidence in a case that was never properly investigated. In 1972, law enforcement didn't have the tools or understanding we have today, especially regarding crimes involving religious communities." She opened her laptop and showed them photocopies of the original police reports from 1972. The investigating officer, Deputy Robert Quinn, concluded that Sister Catherine and Brother Thomas had eloped together. His report states that nuns sometimes abandon their vows for romantic love, and that no evidence of foul play was discovered. Margaret felt a surge of indignation. Anyone who knew Catherine would have realized how ridiculous that conclusion was. She was completely devoted to her vocation. The idea that she would abandon her vows for any man, let alone Brother Thomas, was absurd. "I agree," Lieutenant Martinez said. "From what I've read about Sister Catherine in church records and newspaper accounts, she was known for her dedication to helping troubled children and her work with local families in crisis. That makes her diary entry about children needing justice particularly significant." Mother Agnes leaned forward. "Lieutenant Martinez, we've been thinking about Catherine's mention of hidden evidence. She wrote that she had placed it where it will be safe until God chooses to reveal it. That sounds like she put it somewhere in the convent or on the grounds." "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say," the detective replied. "I'd like to conduct a thorough search of the property, but I want to do it with your cooperation and guidance. You know this place better than anyone, and you understand Sister Catherine's mindset." They began in Catherine's former cell, a small room on the second floor that had been converted to storage after her disappearance. As Margaret climbed the narrow staircase, memories flooded back of late-night conversations with Catherine about faith, doubt, and the challenges of religious life. Catherine used to say that the most important things in life were often hidden in plain sight, Margaret told Lieutenant Martinez as they entered the room. She had a way of finding God's presence in the most ordinary moments. The room was sparse, containing only a few boxes of old linens and some outdated religious texts. But as they searched, Margaret noticed something that had been invisible: To her, for decades, a loose floorboard near the window. "Lieutenant Martinez," Margaret called softly. "Look at this." The detective knelt beside Margaret and examined the floorboard. It moved slightly when pressed, revealing a small gap between it and the adjacent boards. Using a utility knife, Lieutenant Martinez carefully pried up the board, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside the hiding place was a manila envelope, sealed and wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture. On the envelope, in Catherine's handwriting, were the words, "For the protection of the innocent, October 30th, 1972. Lieutenant Martinez photographed the envelope in place before carefully removing it. With Margaret and Mother Agnes as witnesses, she opened the envelope to reveal its contents, several photographs, handwritten notes, and what appeared to be a child's drawing. The photographs were grainy and taken from a distance, but they clearly showed Brother Thomas with several young children in what appeared to be inappropriate situations. The children looked uncomfortable and frightened, and in one image, Thomas appeared to be threatening a young boy who was trying to pull away from him. Margaret gasped and turned away from the photographs. Dear God, Catherine was right. That monster was hurting children right here on our property. The handwritten notes were in Catherine's precise script, documenting dates, times, and descriptions of what she had witnessed. One entry read, October 15th, saw Brother Thomas alone with the Miller boy near the old chapel ruins. The child was crying and trying to leave, but Thomas wouldn't let him go. I was too far away to intervene, but I must find a way to protect these children. Another note was more detailed. October 25th, 3 children from the Hartley family visited the convent for the Harvest Festival. I noticed that young Timothy Hartley became very upset when he saw Brother Thomas. When I asked the boy what was wrong, he whispered that the bad man had touched him in ways that hurt. I tried to get more information, but the child was too frightened to say more. I must act soon. The child's drawing showed a stick figure of a man with an angry face standing over smaller figures that were clearly meant to represent children. At the top of the drawing, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "He is mean to us." Lieutenant Martinez studied each piece of evidence carefully, her expression growing more grim as she absorbed the implications. Sisters, this is evidence of systematic child abuse. Sister Catherine was documenting Brother Thomas's crimes, probably building a case to present to the authorities. But why didn't she go to the police immediately? Mother Agnes asked. Margaret answered before the detective could respond, because in 1972, who would have believed her? A nun accusing a man of child abuse based on observations and the testimony of frightened children, especially in a small town where everyone knew everyone else. Catherine was probably trying to gather enough evidence to ensure that Thomas would be prosecuted. That's likely correct, Lieutenant Martinez agreed, and unfortunately her caution may have cost her life. The final diary entry suggests that Thomas discovered Catherine's investigation. They continued searching the convent, now armed with a better understanding of what they were looking for. In the library, Mother Agnes discovered that several books about child psychology and trauma had been checked out to Sister Catherine in September and October of 1972. Books that would have been unusual reading for a nun unless she was dealing with specific problems. Lieutenant Martinez made note of everything, building a comprehensive picture of Sister Catherine's final weeks. It's clear that Sister Catherine was conducting her own investigation, probably hoping to build an airtight case against Brother Thomas. But somewhere along the way, he realized what she was doing. As afternoon turned to evening, they gathered in the chapel for Vespers, but the usual peace of evening prayer was overshadowed by the weight of their discoveries. Margaret found herself praying not only for Sister Catherine's soul, but also for the children who had suffered in silence for over 50 years. After the service, Lieutenant Martinez addressed both nuns with unusual gravity. Sisters, I need to ask you something important. Are you prepared for what we might discover when we start investigating Brother Thomas's background and whereabouts after 1972? This case may attract significant media attention, and the revelations could be very painful for your community. Mother. Agnes and Margaret exchanged glances before Mother Agnes responded. Lieutenant Martinez, our community has been living with questions about Sister Catherine's disappearance for 52 years. If there's a chance to finally get justice for her and for the children she tried to protect, then we're prepared to face whatever comes. There's one more thing, Margaret added quietly. Catherine's diary mentioned that Thomas knew she had discovered his secret. If he killed her to keep her quiet, we need to find out what happened to her body. Catherine deserves a proper burial, and her family, if any are still alive, deserve to know the truth. Lieutenant Martinez nodded grimly. I've already started running background checks on Thomas Miller. That was Brother Thomas's full name, according to convent records. If he's still alive, he's in his 90s now. But even if he's dead, we may be able to find evidence of what happened to Sister Catherine. As the sun set over the Vermont hills, casting long shadows across the convent grounds, 3 women, 1 detective, and 2 nuns stood united in their determination to solve a mystery that had been hidden for over half a century. Sister Catherine's voice, speaking through her diary and hidden evidence, was finally being heard. But they all knew that the hardest part lay ahead. Finding evidence was one thing. Uncovering the truth about what had happened on that Halloween night in 1972 would require them to dig into the darkest corners of human nature and confront evil that had been lurking in the shadows for far too long. In her small cell that night, Margaret knelt beside her bed and prayed, as she hadn't prayed in years. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "give us the strength to see this through. Help us find justice for Catherine and for those innocent children. And please, if Catherine suffered at the end, let her know that she wasn't forgotten. Let her know that her courage is finally bringing light to the darkness." Outside her window, the forest where Sister Catherine had disappeared so many years ago seemed to whisper with secrets waiting to be revealed. The next morning brought Detective Lieutenant Martinez back to the convent with a team of forensic specialists and additional investigators. What had started as a cold case review was rapidly expanding into a major criminal investigation. The evidence Sister Catherine had so carefully preserved was already yielding results that shocked even seasoned law enforcement professionals. "We've run the photographs through enhancement software," Lieutenant Martinez explained to Sister Margaret and Mother Agnes as they gathered in the convent's conference room. "We've been able to identify at least 3 of the children in the images, all of whom would be adults now. We're also running facial recognition on Brother Thomas to see if we can track his movements after 1972. Dr. Emily Chen, a forensic psychologist who specialized in historical child abuse cases, had joined the investigation team. The documentation that Sister Catherine compiled is remarkably thorough," Dr. Chen observed. "She clearly understood that she was gathering evidence for a potential criminal case. Her notes show that she was trying to establish a pattern of abuse and identify multiple victims." Margaret felt a mixture of pride and sorrow as she listened to the experts discuss Catherine's investigative work. Catherine was always methodical in everything she did. She approached problems the same way she approached prayer, with patience, attention to detail, and unwavering faith that the truth would emerge. "There's something else," Lieutenant Martinez added, consulting her notes. "We've been able to locate some of the families mentioned in Sister Catherine's documentation. The Hartley family still lives in the area, and Timothy Hartley, who would be in his 60s now, has agreed to speak with us." The interview with Timothy Hartley took place that afternoon at the Vermont State Police headquarters. Margaret had requested permission to attend, feeling that her connection to Sister Catherine might help Timothy feel more comfortable discussing traumatic memories from his childhood. Timothy Hartley was now 63 years old, a retired carpenter with graying hair and gentle eyes that seemed to hold decades of carefully guarded pain. When Lieutenant Martinez explained why they wanted to speak with him, his reaction was immediate and visceral. "Sister Catherine," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I remember her so clearly. She was the kindest person I'd ever met. She tried to help me when no one else would listen." Margaret reached across the table and gently touched Timothy's hand. "Timothy, Sister Catherine wrote about you in her diary. She was trying to protect you and the other children. Can you tell us what happened?" For the next hour, Timothy recounted memories that he had spent over 50 years trying to forget. Brother Thomas had indeed been abusing children who visited the convent, using his position of trust and the isolated location to prey on vulnerable victims. "He told us that no one would believe us if we talked," Timothy said, tears flowing freely now. "He said that nuns and priests always protected each other and that we would get in trouble with God if we told anyone. I was only 8 years old. I believed him." Timothy described how Sister Catherine had approached him during the harvest festival, sensing his distress when he saw Brother Thomas. "She was so gentle and patient. She didn't push me to talk, but she made it clear that she cared about what happened to me. I wanted to tell her everything, but I was too scared." "Did you ever see Sister Catherine again after that day?" Dr. Chen asked. Timothy shook his head. "No, but about a week later, my mother said that a nun had called asking about me. My mother told her I was fine and hung up. I always wondered if that was Sister Catherine trying to follow up." The interview with Timothy Hartley was followed by conversations with 2 other men who had been children at the time: David Miller, no relation to Brother Thomas, and Robert Stevens. Both confirmed similar patterns of abuse and intimidation by Brother Thomas, and both remembered Sister Catherine as someone who had shown them unusual kindness and attention during their visits to the convent. Sister Catherine was building a case, Lieutenant Martinez explained to Margaret and Mother Agnes as they reviewed the day's findings. She had identified multiple victims and was documenting evidence systematically. But something spooked Brother Thomas before she could present her case to the authorities. "The question is, what happened on Halloween night?" Mother Agnes said. According to Catherine's final diary entry, she was planning to confront Thomas. About his crimes? Margaret had been wondering the same thing. She had spent the day remembering details from October 31st, 1972, trying to piece together the sequence of events that had led to Catherine's disappearance. "I remember that day," Margaret said slowly. "It was a Tuesday, and we had our usual evening prayers at 7 o'clock. Catherine was there for prayers, but she seemed agitated. She kept looking toward the windows, as if she was expecting someone or watching for something." "What happened after evening prayers?" Lieutenant Martinez asked. "We usually went to our cells for personal prayer and reflection before sleep, but that night I couldn't sleep. Around 10 o'clock I heard footsteps in the hallway. I thought, perhaps someone was ill and needed help, so I opened my door to check." Margaret paused, the memory becoming clearer as she spoke. "I saw Catherine walking toward the stairs, but she wasn't wearing her habit. She was dressed in regular clothes, a dark coat and shoes suitable for walking outside. She was carrying something in her hand, but I couldn't see what it was from." "That distance. Did you speak to her?" Dr. Chen asked. "I started to, but something in her posture stopped me. She looked determined, but also frightened. I had never seen Catherine look frightened before. She was always so calm and confident in her faith. But that night she looked like someone who was about to do something that terrified her." Margaret continued her recollection. "I watched from my doorway as she went downstairs. A few minutes later, I heard the front door open and close very quietly. That was the last time anyone saw her. Lieutenant Martinez made notes as Margaret spoke. So Sister Catherine left the convent around 10 o'clock on Halloween night, dressed in civilian clothes and carrying something unidentified. She was clearly meeting someone or going somewhere specific. But where? Mother Agnes wondered. And why didn't she tell anyone where she was going? Dr. Chen offered a possibility that chilled them all. Based on her diary entry, Sister Catherine believed she had enough evidence to confront Brother Thomas directly. She may have been planning to give him an ultimatum, confess to the authorities, or she would expose him herself. That would have been incredibly dangerous, Margaret said. Thomas was a large man, and if he was desperate to keep his crimes secret... She didn't finish the sentence, but they all understood the implication. Sister Catherine may have walked into a trap that Halloween night, driven by her desire to protect the children she knew were being harmed. Lieutenant Martinez closed her notebook and looked at the two nuns with respect and determination. Sisters, we're going to find out what happened to Sister Catherine. I promise you that. But I need to ask, are you prepared for the possibility that we may find evidence that she was murdered? Margaret and Mother Agnes exchanged glances before Margaret answered. Lieutenant Martinez, Catherine gave her life trying to protect innocent children. If she was murdered for doing God's work, then her death was a martyrdom, even if the Church never officially recognizes it as such. We owe it to her memory to ensure that the truth comes to light, no matter how painful it might be. Mother Agnes nodded in agreement, and we owe it to the children she tried to save. Some of them are still alive, still carrying the trauma of what happened to them. They deserve to know that someone cared enough to fight for them, even if it cost her everything. As the investigation team prepared to leave the convent that evening, Lieutenant Martinez made one final request. Sisters, I want to search the area around Brother Thomas's old cottage tomorrow. According to convent records, it was demolished in 1975, but there might still be evidence buried on the site. Would you be willing to show us exactly where it stood? Margaret felt a chill run down her spine as she agreed to the request. She had avoided that part of the convent grounds for decades, unable to explain why the area had always made her feel uneasy. Now she wondered if her intuition had been trying to tell her something all along. That night, as she knelt for her evening prayers, Margaret found herself speaking directly to Sister Catherine across the decades. Catherine, my dear friend, she whispered, we're getting closer to the truth. Give us strength to see this through. Help us find justice for you and for those children you love so much. In the silence of the chapel, Margaret could almost feel Catherine's presence, encouraging her to continue the fight that had begun 52 years earlier. Tomorrow, they would search for physical evidence of what had happened on that long ago, Halloween night, and Margaret prayed that they would finally be able to lay Sister Catherine's spirit to rest. The search of Brother Thomas's former cottage site began at dawn on a crisp October morning, exactly 52 years after Sister Catherine's disappearance. Lieutenant Martinez had assembled a team of forensic archaeologists, cadaver dogs, and ground-penetrating radar specialists. Sister Margaret walked slowly across the overgrown field where the cottage had once stood, her weathered hands pressed together in prayer. The cottage was right here, Margaret told the investigators, pointing to a barely visible foundation. Outline. It was a small building, maybe 800 square feet, with a root cellar underneath. Thomas used to store vegetables and canned goods down there. Dr. James Harrison, the lead forensic archaeologist, set up his equipment, while Margaret described the layout of the property as she remembered it from 1972. Sister Margaret, you mentioned that Sister Catherine was carrying something when you saw her leave the convent that night. Any idea what it might have been? Margaret closed her eyes, trying to summon the memory with perfect clarity. It looked like papers or documents, maybe a folder or envelope. She was holding it against her chest, the way you'd hold something, precious or important. The ground-penetrating radar revealed several anomalies beneath the earth, areas where the soil density differed from the surrounding ground. One anomaly, located near where the cottage's back door would have been, showed particular promise. "There's definitely something buried here," Dr. Harrison announced. "The soil composition suggests it was disturbed sometime in the 1970s and then left undisturbed for decades." As the excavation team began their careful work, Mother Agnes arrived with coffee and sandwiches for the investigators. She had spent the morning in prayer, asking God to grant them strength for whatever they might discover. "Sister Margaret," Mother Agnes said quietly, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about feeling uneasy around this area for all these years. Do you think part of you always knew something terrible had happened here?" Margaret watched the investigators work, their brushes and tools revealing layers of earth that had kept secrets for over half a century. "I think God sometimes gives us intuitions that we don't fully understand. Catherine always said that the Holy Spirit speaks to us in whispers, and sometimes we have to listen very carefully to hear the message." Around noon, one of the cadaver dogs indicated a strong positive hit in the area where the radar had detected the anomaly. Dr. Harrison called for more careful excavation, and within an hour they had uncovered fragments of cloth and what appeared to be human remains. "We've found something," Dr. Harrison announced grimly. "I need everyone except essential personnel to step back while we document everything in place." Margaret felt her knees grow weak as she realized they had likely found Sister Catherine's final resting place. Mother Agnes supported her as they moved to a respectful distance, both women clinging to each other and praying silently. Lieutenant Martinez approached them with compassionate but professional demeanor. "Sisters, we've found human remains consistent with an adult female, along with fragments of clothing and what appears to be a religious medal. There are also some papers wrapped in plastic that seem to have been buried with the body. The papers, when carefully extracted and examined, proved to be copies of the evidence Sister Catherine had hidden in her cell. Photographs, documentation, and witness statements she had compiled about Brother Thomas's abuse of children. She had taken copies with her that Halloween night, probably planning to use them to confront him directly. She went to his cottage that night to give him one last chance to confess, Lieutenant Martinez concluded. She brought the evidence to show him that she had documented his crimes and that he couldn't continue hurting children. Dr. Chen, who had remained on site during the excavation, studied the positioning of the remains. The burial appears hasty but not random. Someone took time to wrap the body and place it carefully, then covered it thoroughly. This suggests guilt and perhaps some level of respect for the victim, even after committing murder. The forensic evidence painted a clear picture of what had happened on October 31st, 1972. Sister Catherine had confronted Brother Thomas with evidence of his crimes against children. Whether she had intended to give him a chance to turn himself in or had planned to make a citizen's arrest would never be known, but the confrontation had ended with Catherine's death and hasty burial. The cause of death appears to be blunt force trauma to the head, Dr. Harrison reported after a preliminary examination of the remains. There's evidence of a single powerful blow that would have caused immediate death. Margaret found herself oddly comforted by this information. At least she didn't suffer, she whispered. Susie, what it I do. Catherine always said that if God called her home, she wanted to go quickly and peacefully. The investigation into Brother Thomas Miller's whereabouts after 1972 had been proceeding simultaneously with the excavation. What Lieutenant Martinez discovered painted a picture of a man who had spent 50 years running from his crimes. Thomas Miller left Vermont on November 1st, 1972, Lieutenant Martinez reported to the assembled group that evening. He drove to Montreal, Canada, where he assumed a false identity and worked as a handyman for various religious organizations. He lived under the name William Thompson for 30 years before his death in a Quebec nursing home in 2003. "He's dead?" Mother Agnes asked. "Yes, but here's what's remarkable. In his final weeks, Miller contacted a Catholic priest and made a full confession of his crimes. The priest documented everything, including Miller's admission that he had killed a nun named Catherine, who had discovered his abuse of children. Lieutenant Martinez produced a photocopy of a handwritten statement. Father Michel Dubois kept detailed notes of Miller's confession. According to this document, Miller claimed that he never intended to kill Sister Catherine. He said she came to his cottage that Halloween night with evidence of his crimes and demanded that he confess to the authorities. When he refused, she threatened to expose him publicly. The confession continued with Miller's account of the struggle that followed. He claimed that Sister Catherine tried to leave when he became angry, but he grabbed her arm to stop her. She pulled away and fell, hitting her head on the stone hearth of his fireplace. He said she died instantly. Whether it was intentional murder or manslaughter, Thomas Miller spent 50 years knowing he had killed an innocent woman who was trying to protect children, Dr. Chen observed. According to Father Dubois' notes, Miller was tormented by guilt his entire life. He never married, lived as a hermit, and suffered from severe depression and alcoholism. Margaret felt a complex mixture of emotions as she absorbed this information. Justice for Catherine would never be complete. Her killer was beyond earthly punishment. But knowing that he had suffered for his crimes for 5 decades provided some measure of closure. "What about the children he abused?" Margaret asked. "Do they know what we've discovered?" Lieutenant Martinez nodded. "We've contacted Timothy Hartley, David Miller, and Robert Stevens, as well as 2 other men who came forward after news of the investigation began circulating. They're all deeply grateful to learn that Sister Catherine died trying to protect them and that their abuser never had another chance to hurt other children." Timothy Hartley had asked to visit the convent to pay his respects to Sister Catherine's memory. When he arrived the following afternoon, Margaret was struck by how much healing seemed to have taken place in just a few days. "Sister Margaret," Timothy said, his eyes bright with tears of relief rather than pain, "I want you to know that Sister Catherine saved my life, even though she died trying to do it. For 50 years I've carried guilt and shame about what Brother Thomas did to me. But now I know that someone cared enough to fight for me, even when I was too young and scared to fight for myself." He had brought something with him, a small wooden cross that he had carved himself. "I made this for Sister Catherine's grave. I know her body is being returned to your cemetery, and I wanted her to have something from one of the children she died protecting." The funeral for Sister Catherine Marie Dupont was held on November 15, 2024, exactly 52 years and 2 weeks after her death. The small cemetery behind St. Teresa's convent was filled with people whose lives had been touched by Catherine's courage and sacrifice. Timothy Hartley, David Miller, and Robert Stevens served as honorary pallbearers, finally able to publicly honor the woman who had tried to save them as children. Dozens of nuns from neighboring convents attended, along with law enforcement officials, local residents, and members of the media who had been following the remarkable story of Sister Catherine's posthumous vindication. Father Michael O'Sullivan, the diocesan bishop, presided over the service. In his homily, he spoke of Sister Catherine as a modern martyr who had given her life to protect the innocent. Sister Catherine Marie Dupont exemplified the highest calling of religious life, he said, his voice carrying across the hushed cemetery. She chose to confront evil even when she knew it might cost her everything. Her courage reminds us that sometimes the greatest act of faith is standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Sister Margaret, now 73 and frail, but determined to see this moment through, delivered a eulogy that moved many to tears. "Catherine was my mentor, my friend, and my inspiration," she said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "For 52 years I carried the pain of not knowing what happened to her. I sometimes wondered if she had lost her faith and abandoned her calling. Now I know that the opposite was true. Her faith was so strong that she was willing to die for it." Margaret paused, looking out at the faces gathered around Catherine's grave. "Catherine once told me that God's justice might be delayed, but it is never denied." Today we see the truth of those words. Evil tried to silence her voice, but God preserved her testimony in the pages of her diary and in the evidence she so carefully documented. Her voice speaks to us still, calling us to protect the innocent and stand against injustice wherever we find it. As Catherine's casket was lowered into the earth, the assembled mourners sang "Amazing Grace," their voices rising into the crisp Vermont air. Timothy Hartley placed his hand-carved wooden cross on the grave, and each of the other survivors added a white rose, symbols of the innocence that Catherine had died trying to preserve. After the service, Lieutenant Martinez approached Sister Margaret with news that would have made Catherine proud. "Sister, I wanted you to know that our investigation has led to the identification of 2 other potential victims of Brother Thomas's abuse. Both men have come forward and are working with counselors to process their experiences. They've also expressed interest in setting up a foundation in Sister Catherine's memory to help other survivors of childhood abuse. The foundation, established 6 months later, was called the Sister Catherine Marie DuPont Foundation for Child Protection. Timothy Hartley served as its first president, dedicating his retirement years to ensuring that Catherine's legacy would continue to protect children for generations to come. "Sister Catherine couldn't save us from what happened to us as children," Timothy explained during the foundation's inaugural fundraising dinner. "But her courage in trying to expose our abuser probably prevented him from hurting other children. Now we want to honor her memory by creating programs that will identify and stop child predators before they can destroy more young lives." The Foundation's first major initiative was funding training programs for religious communities, teaching clergy and religious workers how to recognize signs of abuse and how to report suspected crimes properly. They also established a scholarship program for young people studying child psychology and social work, ensuring that future generations would be better equipped to protect vulnerable children. Sister Margaret lived to see the Foundation's first annual report, which documented dozens of potential abuse cases that had been identified and investigated thanks to the training programs. She passed away peacefully in her sleep on Catherine's birthday, March 8, 2025, with Sister Catherine's diary on her nightstand and a smile on her face. Mother Agnes found a letter that Margaret had written to be opened after her death. In it, Margaret expressed her gratitude for being chosen to discover Catherine's diary and help bring justice to her dear friend after so many years. "I believe that God orchestrated every detail of this discovery," Margaret had written. "He could have allowed Catherine's diary to be found decades ago, but he waited until the time was right, until we had the technology and understanding to properly investigate her case, until the survivors were ready to come forward, and until there were people in place who would ensure that her sacrifice led to meaningful change." The letter continued, "Catherine always said that God's timing is perfect, even when it seems impossibly slow to human understanding. Now I see the wisdom in his plan. Catherine's story has touched thousands of lives and will continue to protect children for years to come. Her death was not in vain. It was a seed planted in dark soil that has finally bloomed into something beautiful." The discovery of Sister Catherine's diary had repercussions far beyond the immediate case. The Vermont Attorney General's office launched a comprehensive review of historical abuse cases in religious institutions throughout the state. Several other cold cases were reopened and new protocols were established for investigating allegations of abuse within religious communities. Dr. Emily Chen published a groundbreaking study on historical child abuse documentation using Sister Catherine's methodical evidence gathering as a model for how non-professionals can effectively document suspected crimes. The study became required reading in seminary programs and training courses for religious workers. Sister Catherine's approach to documenting abuse was remarkably sophisticated for someone without formal training in criminal investigation, Dr. Chen noted in her research. She understood the importance of establishing patterns, identifying multiple victims, and preserving physical evidence. Her work demonstrates that ordinary people can make extraordinary contributions to justice when they're motivated by genuine compassion for others. The case also inspired changes in Vermont law regarding the reporting of suspected child abuse. The Sister Catherine Marie Dupont Act expanded mandatory reporting requirements to include all religious workers and volunteers, closing loopholes that had previously allowed some cases to go unreported. 5 years after the discovery of Catherine's diary, Timothy Hartley returned to St. Teresa's Convent for the annual memorial service held on the anniversary of Catherine's death. The convent had installed a memorial garden in Catherine's honor, with a bronze plaque bearing her favorite scripture verse. "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me." Mark 9:37. "I come here every year," Timothy told the small group gathered for the memorial service, "not because I need to mourn Sister Catherine, but because I want to celebrate what she accomplished. Because of her courage, I was able to heal from my childhood trauma. Because of her documentation, we were able to ensure that Thomas Miller never hurt another child. And because of her inspiration, hundreds of other children are safer today." Elfetu, current Mother Superior, who had succeeded Mother Agnes when she retired to focus on writing Catherine's biography, read from Catherine's diary during the service. The passage she chose was from October 20th, 1972, 11 days before Catherine's death. "I have been praying about whether I have the courage to do what God is calling me to do. I know that confronting evil often requires sacrifice, and I am prepared to pay whatever price is necessary to protect these innocent children. If my life is the cost of their safety, then it is a price I willingly pay. Christ gave his life for all children. Surely I can give mine for these few who have been placed in my care." As the memorial service concluded, a small group of visitors approached the memorial garden. They were students from the local college who had been studying Catherine's case in their criminal justice program. One young woman, who introduced herself as Sarah Catherine Martinez, named after both St. Catherine and Lieutenant Martinez, spoke for the group. "We wanted to come here to thank Sister Catherine for showing us what real courage looks like," Sarah said, placing a bouquet of white roses at the memorial. "We're all studying to work in law enforcement or child protection services, and Sister Catherine's story reminds us why this work is so important. She didn't have a badge or legal authority, but she found a way to fight for justice anyway." The students had brought something special with them, a petition signed by over 1,000 people requesting that the Catholic Church begin the process of canonizing Sister Catherine as a saint. While the Church's formal response would take years, if it came at all, the petition demonstrated the profound impact that Catherine's story had on people of faith around the world. "Whether or not the Church ever declares her a saint officially," said Father O'Sullivan, who had maintained a close relationship with the convent since Catherine's funeral, "Sister Catherine Marie Dupont is already recognized as a saint by the children she died protecting and by all of us who have been inspired by her courage." As evening approached and the memorial service participants began to disperse, Timothy Hartley remained behind in the garden. He had established a tradition of spending a few quiet moments alone with Catherine's memorial each year, sharing updates about the Foundation's work and thanking her for the sacrifice that had saved his life. "Catherine," he said quietly. His now grey head bowed in prayer. "Another year has passed, and your legacy continues to grow. The Foundation prevented 3 more cases of abuse this year, and our training programs reached over 1,000 religious workers. 27 survivors have come forward and found healing through our counseling programs. You would be so proud of what your courage has accomplished." He paused, looking up at the Vermont sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "I'm getting older now, Catherine, but I promise to keep your story alive as long as I can. The children you saved deserve to know about the woman who loved them enough to die for them. And the children still at risk deserve to benefit from the lessons we learned from your courage." As Timothy walked back toward his car, he felt a sense of peace that had taken him decades to achieve. Sister Catherine's diary had given him more than just answers about the past. It had given him a purpose for the future and a model of faith that sustained him through his own struggles. The small convent of St. Teresa continued its quiet ministry in the Vermont hills, but it was forever changed by the discovery of Sister Catherine's diary. The sisters who lived there now spoke often of Catherine's example, and many visitors came specifically to pray at her memorial garden and to learn about her story. Mother Superior Agnes, in her retirement, completed Catherine's biography titled "Hidden Truth: The Sister Catherine Marie Dupont Story." The book became a bestseller, with all proceeds going to the foundation that bore Catherine's name. In her conclusion, Mother Agnes wrote, "Sister Catherine's story reminds us that God works through ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. She was not a theologian or a detective or a social worker. She was simply a woman of faith who refused to ignore injustice when she encountered it. Her diary, hidden for 52 years in a box of candles, proved that truth has a way of emerging from even the deepest darkness when the time is right. The candles in that box were meant to provide light during times of darkness," Mother Agnes continued. "How fitting that they should have preserved the greatest light of all, the truth that set captives free and brought justice to the innocent." Sister Catherine's story illuminates a path for all of us who seek to serve God by protecting the most vulnerable members of our society. 10 years after the discovery of the diary, the Sister Catherine Marie Dupont Foundation had grown into a national organization with chapters in 12 states. The annual Sister Catherine Awards recognized individuals who had shown exceptional courage in protecting children from abuse. Recipients included teachers, social workers, clergy members, and ordinary citizens who had followed Catherine's example by speaking up for those who could not speak for themselves. At the 10th anniversary celebration held at St. Teresa's Convent, Timothy Hartley announced that he was stepping down as president of the foundation, but would continue serving on its board. "I've spent the last decade of my life honoring Sister Catherine's memory," he said in his farewell address. "Now it's time for a new generation of leaders to carry her mission forward." The new president was Dr. Maria Santos, a former prosecutor, who had specialized in child abuse cases and had been inspired by Catherine's story to dedicate her career to protecting children. "Sister Catherine showed us that you don't need official authority to fight for justice," Dr. Santos said in her acceptance speech. "You just need the courage to act on your convictions and the faith to believe that truth will ultimately prevail." As the celebration concluded and visitors began to leave the convent, a small ceremony took place in the memorial garden. The current Sisters of St. Teresa had commissioned a new addition to Catherine's memorial, a bronze sculpture of hands holding an open book representing the diary that had preserved her testimony and brought her story to light. The inscription Beneath the sculpture read, "In memory of Sister Catherine Marie Dupont, 1937 to 1972, who believed that God's justice might be delayed but is never denied. Her courage lives on in every child protected, every truth revealed, and every voice raised against injustice." Sister Catherine's diary, now preserved in a climate-controlled case in the Vermont State Archives, continued to draw researchers, students and pilgrims who wanted to read her words firsthand. The final entry, written on the day of her death, had become particularly meaningful to visitors. "The truth can no longer be hidden. I have prayed and fasted for guidance, and the Lord has made his will clear. Tonight, I must confront the evil that has taken root in our sacred community. Brother Thomas knows I have discovered his secret, and I fear what he might do to protect himself. But I cannot remain silent when innocent lives are at stake." The diary entry continued, "I have hidden evidence of his crimes in the place where it will be safe until God chooses to reveal it. If something happens to me, please know that I go willingly into whatever the Lord has planned. My trust is in him alone. The children deserve justice. God sees everything, and his justice will not be delayed forever." These words, written in the final hours of Catherine's life, had proven prophetic. God's justice had indeed come, delayed by 52 years, but ultimately triumphant. The children Catherine had tried to protect found healing and peace. The man who had silenced her voice was prevented from hurting other innocents. And Catherine's own story became a beacon of hope for anyone fighting against seemingly insurmountable evil. In the quiet chapel of St. Teresa's convent, where Sister Catherine had prayed her final prayers before walking into the darkness to confront her killer, a candle now burns perpetually in her memory. The flame represents the light of truth that no amount of darkness can extinguish, a truth that waited patiently in a box of candles until God deemed the time right for revelation. Sister Catherine Marie Dupont's courage echoes across the decades, reminding us that sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply refusing to look away when evil reveals itself. Her diary, discovered 52 years after her death, proved that truth has its own timeline, and that God's justice, though sometimes long delayed, never fails to arrive exactly when it is most needed.